Feels right. I just wanted to let you know that yes, we will be recording. So if you're happy to be on screen, we'd love you to stay on screen. But if you feel like you want to not be on the recording, then that's absolutely fine. You're still able to use the chat or let us know if you want to chat to us or ask any questions. I think Petri is going to lead us through a talk today on his philosophy of breathing. Petri is a Petri Berndtson is a leading philosopher of breathing and a research associate at the ZRS Koper Institute in Slovenia. His work explores the experiential nature of breathing, embodiment, and phenomenology. Sorry, I've really struggled with that word. Drawing on thinkers such as Merleau-Ponty and Bachelard. He's the author of the Phenomenological Ontology of Breathing, which is his first book, and a co-editor of Atmospheres of Breathing, and has spoken internationally on breath and philosophy and contemplative practice. You will find his website on the flyer and on the page, and you can go and visit him at any time. I'm going to hand over to you now, Petri, and you can guide us through your session. Thank you.
Okay, everybody, very much welcome to this my presentation on Jesus and the Buddha as the phenomenologists of breathing. It's a great pleasure that Jean invited me to this session today. And my idea is that we were talking before everybody, all the participants were let in with Chris and Jean that I would give kind of like around an hour speech, and then we would have discussion for half an hour or perhaps more, because first it was given the time that it would be 1.5 hours around, but if there is more interest and more questions and discussion, we can go the whole time 2 hours. And if it gets really wild, I have at least time for even like half an hour more for discussion if there is super much interest of all kinds of comments and questions and perhaps disagreements and whatever comes. I am totally open for all kinds of feedback and comments and discussions. I'm truly excited to reply to them and to have this open discussion about this topic, which might, at least it has shown a lot of interest, that I'm so excited that so many of you have joined us today. And like also it's a topic because there is not, perhaps in this whole world, unless you are a small child who haven't learned much about what's happening around us, there most probably is not a person who has never heard of Jesus or of Buddha. So it's whatever you think of Jesus or whatever you think of Buddha, pretty much everybody has some kind of opinion or some kind of understanding of their character and of their teachings. If you are a Christian or you're a Buddhist or you're an atheist, or if you are a Muslim or a Hindu or whatever is your belief system, you have some kind of idea about these people, Jesus and Buddha. So in that sense, it might like bring a lot of interest and a lot of discussion. So my idea is that I would give that 1 hour speech, and then we would have like half an hour, or even 1.5 hours for discussion. And then before I give my speech, let's do a little breathing meditation before that to kind of introduce us to experientiality of breathing. And then before we start our discussion, we can have another little session about breathing, like experiential meditation or little practice with the breath. So let's get into the mood of Jesus. But or before that, I would like, before we start the meditation, I actually want to put a certain thought in the atmosphere before we start. So I share my screen for a second before we start. And so here I have the subtitle, or the title, that Jesus and the Buddha's Phenomenology of Breathing. But then in the first page of my my presentation slides, I have this quote from Belgium-origined French philosopher Lucy Irigaray, who says in one of her works the following: neither the practice of Buddha nor even the practice of Christ may be understood only through words, through texts. They are inhabited by breath, by the energy that breath awakes, arouses in us, in a way forgotten by us Westerners. So with that thought in your mind, let's go into the breath meditation. So with that idea of Irigaray, that if we only read the words of Buddha or Jesus and try to interpret them with only this kind of reading techniques or ways of interpretation, and not go also into the experience of breath, and through our own experience of the breath, try to also understand what could it mean that what Buddha or Jesus perhaps experientially understood about the breath, and what perhaps the breath was teaching to them in some kind of deep way. And after the breath practice, we will go little by little into what could it mean for in Jesus's and Buddha's thinking. But let's close our eyes, place your hands on your stomach, and let's just listen to the breath in the belly. Feel how the breath, little by little, moves your belly, how it little by little expands with each in-breath, and how it little by little goes smaller with the out-breath. And then let's take a few bigger breaths intentionally into the belly, through the nose. And then through the mouth, let it out. And then through the nose. And keep it there for a while. And then let it out through the mouth. And then be as conscious as possible how the breath comes through your nose, your nostrils, in, and then how it comes out through your mouth, the out-breath. And try to make it as long as possible, the out-breath from the mouth. And then through the nose, and then hold it for a little while in, and then blow it out as slowly and longly as possible And one more time through the nose in. And hold it in there a little bit and smile with that breath when it's inside of you. Enjoy it, that there is this air that came from the outside world into you, and then blow it out as slowly as possible. Then just let the breath do its thing and let it breathe how it wants to breathe. Just follow with your hands from the outside of your belly, how you feel, how the belly moves, and then feel from the inside of belly how the breath expands inside of you and how it shrinks again in the out breath. And you can have this kind of inner smile of this incredible phenomenon taking place each and every moment. Perhaps it's the greatest show on earth that we are witnessing and we are part of. This event and phenomenon of breath. Feel how the breath is taking care of you each and every moment, how it loves you, because there is not any greater love than keeping one alive. So think how much this atmosphere of air and that breath loves each and every one of us as they keep us living each and every moment. How they massage you inside your belly, in your chest, in your back, with each of these openings and shrinkings of the body. This incredible loving massage is taking place all the time. And with this experience of breath, I think it is good to go into the presentation. So little by little, open your eyes as slowly as you can, and same time still feel the breath moving in and out of you, opening you, closing you, enlarging you, and shrinking you. So, welcome back. So, as I said that before we, or let's say that first we go little by little to Jesus and Buddha as we find them today in your life, how you understand them at the moment, or how our time and our different cultures understand them. And then we go to phenomenology because my title as it is, I let in one person. So as the title is Buddha, Jesus and the Buddha as Phenomenologist of Breathing, and there most probably is many people who haven't heard of phenomenology, or if they have heard of phenomenology, still they have not heard that phenomenology is in a important manner also connected with breathing, because many phenomenologists have quite much forgotten the question of breath or the phenomenon of breathing. So our structure will be to see how we perhaps understand at the moment Jesus and the Buddha, then what does it mean to do phenomenology, or what is phenomenology and what it means to be a phenomenologist. So we could understand why I would call Jesus and Buddha phenomenologists. And then we go little by what it's meant by phenomenology of breathing. And then we go to see if Buddha and Jesus could be understood as phenomenologists of breathing, and how perhaps it could be truly revealing if we could understand them in this kind of manner, in a new manner, and perhaps it would open to us a quite new door and quite new understanding of how to interpret Jesus's teachings and to the teachings of Buddha. So, as I said earlier, there most probably is not many people who are so famous in this world as Jesus and Buddha. So there is not most probably not many people who have never heard of their names. So, but that also means that there is a lot of, because each and every one has understood their meaning and their teachings in a certain way, that means also that to find and understand perhaps in a totally different kind of way their teaching can be quite challenging, because there is so many preconceptions of what they actually teach and what they perhaps meant and what they have meant to each and every one of you. Like if we think of Christianity and Buddhism in this world, and all, like there is around 2.5 billion Christians in this world, which means around 30% of whole global population of the world. Then also for the Muslims, Jesus plays a very important character. He is truly a beloved and highly prominent figure in Islam also, seen as an important messenger and prophet for the Muslim people. And there is around 2 billion Muslims in the world, which is around 25% of the whole global population of the world. And then there is around 350 million Buddhists in the world, which is around 5% of the global population, which means that already this is something like 60% of the whole population of the world who are somehow following the teachings of Jesus or of Buddha. But that doesn't, of course, mean at all that Jesus and Buddha are also affecting the people who are, for example, atheists or followers of some other religions, because, for example, the whole Western culture is totally Christian culture, even if it's not anymore so much, because it has throughout the whole history from the birth of Christianity, it has cultivated all moral systems, understanding of what does it mean to be a human being, how the societies have been structured. The Christian tradition has affected all of these in so many different ways. The morality of how we understand what it does mean to be a human being, and how in the East, for example, India, China, Japan, the Buddhist teachings have affected the culture, the society, the arts, everything, also in the Christian culture, how our music, how our painting, all arts are affected so deeply by the Christian tradition, even if we are perhaps atheists or whatever ever we are. So these two people have affected and inspired so much of how we think, how we behave, how we understand, how we relate with other people, how we have structured our societies, understanding of what a good life is, how we should understand what our goals are, how we are like treating other people, and so on. So, but then also, it is interesting that these two people have created so many different kinds of forms of their own inside of their own religions, so that there are so many different kind of understandings of what they actually taught. And people have been also fighting so much of what's the correct interpretation. So how is it possible that now there is in Christianity three different kinds of main strands of Christianity? There is the Catholicism, there is the Orthodox Christianity, and there is the Protestant Lutheran Christianity. So, and then in the past, there was way much more diversity in Christianity in the first 300-400 years of the origins of Christianity, because there was also the Gnostic movements, there was the Marcion movements, there were the Valentinians, which then, when the Christianity became a state religion of Rome, these other forms of Christianity started to be destroyed and their texts were burned and destroyed. So there was even more different kinds of interpretations of what actually Jesus was teaching. And then in the Buddhist tradition, there is also so many different kinds of traditions of how to interpret and to how to understand the Buddhist tradition. For example, there is the Theravada Buddhism, there is the Tibetan Buddhism, there is the Japanese and Chinese Zen or Zen Buddhism, and for example in Japan there is two main strands of Zen Buddhism, the Soto Zen and the Rinzai Zen. So this already means that their teachings can be understood in quite different many kind of ways. And of course, for example, in the West, there has been so many wars between the Catholics and the Protestants, and also then the whole how the West colonized Africa or the Americas and brought Christianity to these places and forced feed the Christianity in the killed people and forced them in the name of Christian love. That's weird that I made this said killed and then these balloons came. This is so strange because every time I try to make something like this kind of things happening or like make thumbs up, I can't do any of them. And then suddenly, surprising way, balloons come or the thumbs up come in a moments when I didn't intend that. So I wasn't wanting to put balloons when I said that Christians were killing other people. That was, of course, not my intention. So that already tells that in the name of Christianity, which was supposed to be the religion of love, many great things have happened, but also so many absolutely horrifying things have happened, which already tells that this is a truly and highly complex issue, and what we should be thinking about, what actually Jesus meant, or then what Buddha meant. So with this starting point of that everybody has a certain kind of idea what Christianity is, or what Jesus taught, and what Buddha meant to people, or what he meant to taught, and how much variety there is, let's go to phenomenology. Yes, Sean.
Oh, don't worry. I wasn't putting my hand up. I was
Okay, okay.
I was
I
just
thought
looking
you.
at the screen. No,
Okay,
thanks. It's okay. Thank you.
okay. So, what does it? Let's talk about phenomenology, because this, of course, is the theme of the discussion. Um, so, what is phenomenology? Phenomenology is a strand of Western philosophy, which was started by Edmund Husserl in the beginning of 20th century. And then German philosopher Husserl has had many followers who interpreted his message of phenomenology, or his way of doing phenomenological philosophy, in quite many different kind of ways. But what has been like the main ideas of phenomenological philosophy are Husserl's motto or slogan. What does it mean to do phenomenology? Is back to things themselves. And to get back to things themselves meant get away from theories, and away from books, and away from traditions. So the first step of phenomenology, in order that we could get back to things themselves, would be to place in abeyance, to kind of put aside as much as possible our ready-made theories, our ready-made answers, our ready-made traditions, our ready-made preconceptions and prejudgments about anything that we are thinking, or we are trying to understand, or we are trying to perceive, or be in contact with. And this kind of putting in abeyance, or putting aside, or trying to make a pause of something, or put in kind of brackets, these are all different kind of ways what in phenomenology has been used for this methodological step of phenomenology, and kind of like the how to get the way into phenomenology. This of course is highly difficult, because often it is almost impossible to put all one's preconceptions, or prejudgments, or pre-understandings for a moment, kind of like on holiday, to put them aside. But if we are able to put them aside, in place them in abeyance for a moment, or at least some of these preconceptions, something truly important takes place then. So normally we are full of ready-made answers, we are full of opinions about all kinds of things, but if we are able to put them aside for a moment, what will take place? We will get into the place which is a little bit like little children, because little children, of course, don't have yet true beliefs, or ready-made answers almost about anything. And that's why they are full of wonder. The more you don't know things, the more you wonder the world around you. The more you question, the more you are open to everything that possibly can appear to you. And in phenomenology, this wonder in front of or behind the world is the starting point of how to start to do phenomenology. And for phenomenologists, we are wondering how the world appears to us in our experience. This means that in phenomenology, we are returning to our lived experience. We are returning to how the world and things themselves appear to us within our experience if we have put aside all our ready-made theories or all our ready-made answers or what we have learned from the books or we have learned from the culture or those traditions that we are born into and grown into. That also means that we need to place pretty much everything, all our preconceptions of what we have of Jesus and of Buddha for a little moment on vacation, for a little moment on side. Then when we return to the lived experience of our life, how the world and all things appear to us in our everyday lived experience, then we can start to ask phenomenologically, what in this our experience of the world and our experience of ourselves and experience of other people and all things around us, what could perhaps be the most fundamental ways of appearing of this experience? So it's not only returning to experience, but then going deeper, going into the kind of roots of experience, going into the beginnings of that experience, to the most original layers of that experience. And then different phenomenologists have different view on what actually are the most fundamental levels or layers of our experience of the world when we are first able to return back to that experience by placing aside all those ready-made answers and theories and conceptions and traditions. So how does the world then reveal itself to us, and what is the most fundamental in that revealing of the world? And famous German phenomenologist Martin Heidegger thought that the experience of practical world, how we are in a practical way, not in a theoretical way, but in the practical way, dealing with our relation with the world, for example, with glasses and with books and tables and computers and cooking and making things and using tools and so on. So Heidegger understood that this is kind of the starting point that we need to if we want to start to make philosophy and think important questions of human life, we need to, because philosophy has been such a long time and been understood as a very theoretical field of thinking. But Heidegger put that theoretical way of thinking and theoretical dealing with the world into brackets to place in abeyance. And then he understood that the world reveals to us in a practical manner. And this is the starting point of how we would start to think anew all important questions of life and philosophical questions. Okay. Then there was another French phenomenologist, Emmanuel Levinas, who thought that the most original way of how the world appears to us in our experience is our encounter with the other people, and especially face-to-face encounter with the other person, and how we grow to be human beings is in that face-to-face communication with other people, and that should be the starting point of how to start to do phenomenology, how to start to do philosophy, how to start to think and explore and wonder the most important questions of human life. Then very close phenomenologist for me is another French thinker and philosopher and phenomenologist, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who is perhaps the most famous phenomenologist of the body. He's kind of like patron saint of for the philosophers of understanding experiential and lived body. So Merleau-Ponty understood that the first way how the world appears to us is through our perception, and that how our as bodies we perceive the world around us and ourselves and our relation with other people. And Merleau-Ponty talked about the primacy of perception, how the perception is that first way of how in our experience the world appears to us, how it reveals itself to us. And this should be the starting point of how to think important questions, how to start to think the questions of philosophy. Another French phenomenologist is who is very important for me is Christian and Bachelard. And Bachelard is a phenomenologist who was talking about the primacy of imagination. In Bachelard's view, the world appears to us in the first place in an imaginative way. And Bachelard understood that actually before our senses perceive the world, Bachelard thinks that our ears and eyes are imagining the world. Now, in my PhD, which came out in 2018 I did my PhD in Finnish University, in Jyväskylä, University of Jyväskylä. I wrote a PhD titled Phenomenological Ontology of Breathing, which Jean mentioned, and then it has this subtitle which is absolutely so difficult that I don't even remember it myself. And in this PhD, I took Merleau-Ponty's bodily phenomenology as my starting point, and then Merleau-Ponty left very few little hints about how breath is connected with the world, and he had few of them around in his different works, but he never mentioned anything how they should be interpreted, or he didn't think of them any further. He just mentioned them, and they kind of were, for me, this kind of totally cryptic and uncharted field and world where nobody had really gone before me. There has been a lot of research of Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology, because Merleau-Ponty lived from 1908 till 1961, and there has been written so many studies of Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology. But for some weird reason, nobody had before me taken them truly under investigation, these few Merleau-Ponty's little remarks about breathing. So in my PhD, I took these Merleau-Ponty's remarks about breathing and started to think of how could it be that if we would start to think that perhaps breathing is that first beginning how the world appears to us in our experience. And not only because it's the first breath when the baby is born, that of course is the kind of the first opening in a very important sense, because that is that first opening when the baby is born, and then little by little in child development, the baby starts to develop other ways of being in the world. This is of course highly important, but it's not only how we are born into world, but also each and every moment, it's the beginning in our experience, because I can close my eyes and I can close my ears and I can close my mouth, and I can kind of try to shut myself from the world as much as possible, which happens when we go to sleep. The sleeping is something that normally in our daily awakened life, we are active towards the world, we are dealing with other people, and we're doing all kinds of things, and work and hobbies and social activities and everything, all kinds of stuff. But then when we go to sleep, there is this incredible thing. We go into our beds and we try to shut the whole world out of our lives. And we close our eyes and we pretend and we're not moving and we're not talking with other people, and we try to be as immobile as possible. We kind of try to become as dead to the world as possible. But the only thing what we are actually doing is that we're lying there like dead people, but we are imitating the sleeper's breath. And then little by little, that opening of the breath is the only true opening to the world. And then we are breathing the whole time. So we try to close all other channels and doors to the world, except the door of breath is wide open, which tells that we return while we go to the sleep. We return to this, the most fundamental relation to the world, which I argue is the breath. And in this PhD, I try to develop what would it mean if we would start to talk about the primacy of breathing, and that how the breath would be experientially, phenomenologically, the starting point, how to start to think all important philosophical questions and all other important questions of life in a new way, in dialogue and in relation and in the atmosphere of experience of breathing. Then after that book, that PhD came 2023, my book from Routledge, Phenomenological Ontology of Breathing, The Respiratory Primacy of Being, which is edited version and much shortened version of my PhD, and also much like crystallized and cultivated book. And this, now we get into, so the breath as in my PhD and in my book is understood as the most fundamental opening to the world, to the atmosphere of air. And that opening is the starting point of how to start to think and how to start to understand the world and our relation to others and everything else in a new way. And this gives our background of, like, now that we can start to think, what could it mean to understand Jesus and Buddha within this atmosphere in a totally new way? So my question after this is, like, what if the teachings of both Jesus and the Buddha begin with the breath? Could it be that it actually was the starting point of both the Buddha and Jesus for their new ways of thinking and teaching that then were interpreted all kinds of manners? But could it be that their experience of breathing was the starting point of their teaching and their new way of understanding the world? And my argument is that this is the case. At the same time, it is important to acknowledge that we don't actually know very much of what they truly were teaching, because no text we have of Buddha himself or Jesus himself. We have only the texts from their students and their followers, and not even their followers who were alive, but few centuries after. And then there is the debate about like how early, for example, the Christian Gospels are. There is the at the moment there is the mainstream view of many of the early Christian scholars that the Gospel of Mark is about like 70 after the death of after the beginning of how do I say it? 70 AD. That's the right correct way. Say, and Matthew and Luke are around 80 to 85 or 90, and the Gospel of John is something like 90 to 100 or 110. But then there is also a view of quite many scholars who I tend to think, in my interpretation, they are, I would say that they are more correct. And these are thinkers like German Marcus Vincent, who I will refer to later. And for example, Marcus Vincent, who I think is a great early Christianity scholar, he thinks that the Gospels actually in that form that we now have them in the New Testament, they are actually from 130 to 150. There were earlier versions, but there has been so many reworkings that it's very difficult to get what could have been the earliest teachings. But if even if these mainstream views are correct, which would be then that Mark would be around 70 AD, still that would be like 40 years since Jesus died, which means that like 40 years would be in between Jesus and the first writings. And if Marcus Vincent or other scholars like him would be correct, then it would be like almost 100 years after the death of Jesus. So is it 40 years or 100 years? Still in 40 years, the memory of people, and because there were no recording machines, so it was only going from memory to the memory of the next person. And like if we little bit like we have the broken telephone thing, if or somebody says something and the next person remembers in a different way, and then so we don't actually know for certain at all what Jesus was teaching. And the same is with Buddha, because these teachings were never written by Buddha himself. So we have guesses. Marcus Vincent, for example, calls the first 100 years of Christianity kind of black box. It's a black box where all researchers and all people kind of put their wishful thinking into. And now the question, of course, is now that I will be talking about Jesus and Buddha as phenomenologist of breathing, then we could ask that, am I doing exactly the same? That I'm putting kind of my wishful thinking of Jesus and the Buddha, because I have done phenomenological work on breathing. So then I start to think that, of course, then also Jesus and the Buddha were phenomenologists of breathing. Like that would be great news for me. So is it only my wishful thinking? I will try to convince you, or at least try to show to you that in my view, it's not at all only my visual thinking. But at the same time, I could not make this kind of interpretation unless I had done my phenomenological research on breath with my PhD and then with my book, and also what I have later done. Because, for example, 2024 came this book out, or this kind of publication air and breath in religions and philosophies. And in this book, I wrote an article about Jesus as in a phenomenological perspective, as a breathing thinker. And also this book came 2023 or 2024. This is Routledge book, the Routledge Handbook on Phenomenology of Mindfulness. And in this book, I wrote an article where I interpret Buddha as a phenomenologist of breathing. And my this presentation very much is grounded on these two works. And of course, also my PhD and my this book that came based on this PhD. And actually in my PhD, I was already talking about Jesus in connected to breath, but that was cut off, that part, from the book that came then later. So could it be that Jesus and Buddha returned to breath and to the experience of breath? And is it possible that it was the breath that taught them their understanding of breathing, and that created their new religions or their new ways of thinking? Okay, now I share my screen. Okay, now I don't know what happened. What do you see?
Only a black screen.
Okay, I wonder why that is. Let's see. I'm sorry, because when we tried, it was working. Okay, now.
The black screen did say you were sharing your screen, but maybe you have to tell it.
There.
Oh, there. We can see it now.
You can see it now.
Yeah, I can see your screen. I can see there's a page up on it.
Okay, wait. Can you still see it?
Now I can see your, you know, you started with the slide, the Jesus and Buddha as phenomenologists. That's what I can see, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes,
So,
yes, now we can see your presentation. Yeah.
fantastic. So, it's important here that we start to read a little bit Jesus now, the text of Jesus from the first chapter of Mark. And it's important to understand that the words, the New Testament was written in Greek, and then certain words were, of course, translated from the Hebrew language and Aramaic into Greek. And the important word in Hebrew is the word ruach, which can be translated and can mean either breath, wind, or spirit. And that word ruach is translated into Greek as pneuma, which means breath, wind, air, or spirit. And then in Greek also an important word is metanoia, which can be understood as change one's way, conversion, repentance, or change of mind. And then another important word here is the Greek word pistis, which normally is translated as in the translations of New Testament as belief or to believe. And this word metanoia is normally translated in most of the English translations of New Testament as repentance. But I wouldn't translate it as repentance. I would translate it as change of one's way or conversion or change of mind. And I would translate this pistis as faith or as trust, or maybe more even in trust. And then in New Testament, the word pneuma is translated pretty much every time pretty much in every English translation of New Testament and in the Gospels as spirit and not as breath or wind or air. So let's go into Mark, the first chapter of Mark 8:15. And so it is important that this is one of the best translations of Bible from academic perspective. It is called the New Revised Standard Version. This is what the initials NRSV mean. So in Mark, it is said that John the Baptist said in the beginning, in that the verse 8, I have baptized with water, but he still baptize, meaning Jesus will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. But that spirit is the word pneuma. So I will now translate the spirit, which is the word pneuma, as breath. And I will read it in my translation. And then you will see how totally different the whole of this little piece of text will open if we read it like that. So John the Baptist says, I have baptized you with water, but he will baptize you with the holy breath. And then starts from the verse 9. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John, meaning the John the Baptist, in the Jordan River. And just as he was coming up out of water, Jesus saw the heavens torn apart and the breath descending like a dove on him. A voice came from heaven, you are my son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased. Okay, let's stop here. Think about it. This is, if we read it as breath, and we read it in a sense that this is from a phenomenological perspective, from the perspective of somebody, from the perspective of experience, that it's revealing or trying to describe an experience, that we are not reading it. We have put all religious traditions and ways of understanding previously these parts of the New Testament or the Gospel for a moment on vacation. As I said, what's the method of phenomenology? We have placed them in abeyance for a moment, whatever you think of these words. And let's try to get into that. What could it mean if this would be a phenomenological description of experience? So that Jesus was baptized, he was taken, and in the old days, the baptism was that you were put under the water into the Jordan River and actually kept there under the water as long as you didn't die. And then the task of the baptizer was to take you up in the sense that you didn't die, but you were like a long time there under the water without breath. And then you were taken up, and then the breath comes into you like a new breath. And then you have been kind of already initiated into this, that you want to learn and experience something new. Of course, baptism is that you will be washed away from your old life and you are ready to experience and to have a conversion for something completely new, to change your ways of your life. That's why you are there, to be ready to be baptized into the river. And then you come up and you can breathe again. So this is the true experience of breathing for Jesus, is like that breath came back to him like a dove, like a white bird that came onto him. And then he heard this voice. There is like how in connection to breath, we learn so many kinds of teachings. And that experience was that breath and that heaven, which can also be translated as air, because it's a word which in Greek is uranos, but that original word in Hebrew was shamayim, which also means air or atmosphere, not only heaven. So if there was a voice that came from air or from heaven, which of course we are connected with breath, and there came this message or this teaching that you are actually the son of breath or son of this atmosphere that we are connected to, and the beloved, that this atmosphere of breath loves you so deeply, and it is so pleased with you. And this, anybody who has done breath work or gone deeper into the experience of breathing, like what I showed the first quotation from Irigaray, was this, that if we only try to translate and understand these words about the life of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus with the traditional ways of interpreting the words and not trying to understand them through the experience of breathing, if the spirit is not translated in normal way as spirit, but as truly as breath, as the pneuma really gives us chance to do that. And I would say that that's truly the most fundamental way of translating that word, because the Greek word pneuma comes from the word verb pnoi, which means to breathe. But the tradition has totally, very much forgotten this. There is some thinkers in the Catholic tradition in the 20th century, for example, important French Catholic poet Paul Claudel, who said that the word spirit needs to be always translated in the first place as breath to understand, to interpret in the meaning of breath. And another Catholic theologian, Donald Gelby, whose work he translates pneuma and ruach always as breath. But these are truly exceptions in our Christian tradition. But I am even putting in abeyance their Catholic tradition, but only taking their insight about this translating pneuma's breath. Okay, so, and then in verse 12, and the breath immediately drove him into the wilderness. He was in wilderness 40 days, and tempted by Satan, he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. Which means that if we think about it, when Jesus first understood and he felt that he had this intimate experience with the breath, that he truly felt that this atmosphere of breathing, this aerial and heavenly atmosphere of breathing loved him, and he felt like the son of the breath, the son of the heaven or air. He wanted to go deeper and deeper into the experience of breathing. So it was breathing that drove him into wilderness, into outside of the city, into the nature, where he was 40 days with the breath. And of course, if you are going deeper and deeper into the experience of breathing, in the quote marks, the Satan starts to tempt you. And Satan is I would interpret here, all the things that take us away from our most fundamental understanding of life, from the breath. For example, all material things, temptation to make more money, how I will grow into become a great person in the society, all kinds of things that the society and people in general think are way more important than the question of breath. Because because normally in our everyday life, we are very much forgetful of the breath. And then the angels waited on him, which means that the angels are messengers of the heaven, or the messengers, the invisible messengers going in the air, which is like they are giving those more and more those teachings to Jesus, of teaching him what does it mean that we are breathing people, what kind of wisdom we can learn from the breath. And from there, after the 40 days of going deeper and deeper into the questions of breathing and learning from the breath, taking the breath as your most important guide or teacher, his understanding of life and what is most important in one's human life develop that what is the Jesus is teaching. And there immediately then starts the beginning of, in Galilee, the ministry, the teaching. And now that John was arrested, Jesus came to Galilee and proclaimed the good news of God. And here it is important to ask, what do we mean by God? Because if we look at I already mentioned Merleau-Ponty, if we normally we think that we know what God means, and we have ready-made answers because of our upbringing or because we are part of certain kind of Christian faith or Muslim faith or whatever faith. Or if we are atheists, we immediately say that God doesn't exist, so I don't have to care about this, these are nonsense things and so on. But Merleau-Ponty says that for a philosopher, the question for a philosopher is not so much to know if God exists or does not exist, if the proposition God exists is correct or incorrect, as to know what one understands by God, what one wishes to say in speaking of God. This is then the question of God, what perhaps, and here it would mean that we are not immediately saying that God exists or doesn't exist, or that this proposition that Jesus speaks about God, that this is correct, or an atheist would say that this is total nonsense, it's incorrect. But to truly try to understand what we are talking about when we speak of God, and what could it be that Jesus wishes to say when he's speaking of God. Could we have this kind of like the phenomenological understanding of wonder in front of God, in front of like something mysterious that we don't actually know what perhaps Jesus meant when he says the good news of God? The only thing that we can be certain of is that that good news of God, which this word good news in Greek evangelion is most of the time translated as gospel, that good news of God means something important connected with this breath. Because immediately first Jesus has this experience of baptism connected with this breath and that voice coming, you are my son, the beloved, with you I am well pleased. And then he goes into 40 days to wilderness to develop and deepen his experience of the breath. And immediately after that, his ministry or his teaching begins. So that good news of God is in some kind of truly important manner connected with his experience of the breath. And here it is important to acknowledge, if we read the Gospels, it is actually the case that Jesus does not define his concept of God anywhere in the Gospels. He does not, in a clear manner, say anywhere what he means by God. And what is even more interesting, it is that the only place where he says something in a little bit more clearer way, but even there it is quite cryptic. We can find from John chapter 4, verse 24, Jesus says, in Greek, pneuma or theos. And this is translated pretty much in every Bible, God is spirit. But if we translate it in a as careful manner as possible, it actually doesn't say that, what the translation says. Because, and there is only one French translator from 2013 who, in his French translation of Gospel of John, Yves Jean Leloup is the translator's name. He translates this pneuma or theos, theos meaning God, and he translates it in French, souffle le Dieu, which then could be translated into English as breath the God, which could be, so which totally different than spirit is God, because first of all, that pneuma is first and the God comes after, and there is no word is anywhere. So breath the God. So would that mean perhaps that breath is God for Jesus? What he means by God? This is, of course, as I said, the first 150 years of Christianity is like a black box, which we don't know anything about. So we are just making guesses, but that's a possible interpretation. So if we would go with that translation and interpretation, could it then mean that the good news of the breath, the God, is what he was teaching? And then he said, the time is fulfilled, the kingdom of God has come near. And here it says repent, but it doesn't mean repent. It's the word metanoia, which means turn around or make a total conversion in your life, or make the transformation that turns everything around in your life. And trust, here it's believe, but trust in the good news. And the good news, the evangelion or the gospel, is connected with that question of breath. And if it's that, the trust in the good news, trust in the God, which if it's the Gospel of John, it's the breath, the God. So is it the good news that we trust the breath, the God? So this is how Jesus' teaching started. So so from the experience of breath in the Jordan River, then he deepens his experience of breath in the wilderness for 40 days. Then he starts his teaching and talks about the good news of God, which is in a deeply intertwined manner connected with this breath, this pneuma. Okay, this is how I understand the Jesus. Then let's go to Buddha. And it's possible that Buddha's whole teaching started also from his experience of breathing. Famous Japanese writer and researcher of Zen, and who made Zen Buddhism truly famous in the West, is D.T. Suzuki, who writes, the Buddha's teachings all start from his enlightenment experience. So already there, if phenomenology is to return to the experience, and all his teachings started from that enlightenment experience, So we are talking about certain kind of phenomenology of enlightenment. And another English very important scholar of Buddhism, Sue Hamilton, writes in her book about early Buddhism, I have come to think that it is by starting with an attempt to understand what the Buddha's experience of enlightenment involved and what it means, what one can best understand what he subsequently taught. This is partly because it was not until after he had had the experience that he taught anything at all, and partly because he himself said that everything he taught was intended to help others have the same experience, and only that. Okay, so Hamilton thinks that we can't understand what the teachings of Buddha were if we don't first try to understand what this enlightenment experience or this experience of enlightenment meant for Buddha. And he only started to teach after he had had that enlightenment experience. And the only thing he wanted to teach to his students, or the monks or bhikkhus, how you want to call them, was that they would also have the same experience that he had, this enlightenment experience, or what is also called the experience of nirvana. Okay, let's go then into Buddha's phenomenology of breathing. Great Slovenian scholar writes in this book that I edited with another Slovenian philosopher, Leonard Skov. This came 2018 out. This is the first anthology of philosophy of breathing entitled Atmospheres of Breathing. And Tamara Dietrich has an article about Buddha's breathing in this anthology, and she writes, as narrated in there is a typo, it should be Pali Canon, not Palu Canon. It's my fault. So it should read, as narrated in the Pali Canon, the Buddha attained awakening, bodhi, through mindfulness of breathing and continues to practice it thenceforth. So in Pali Canon, the most important and the earliest texts of Buddhism, it is said that Buddha attained the experience of enlightenment or the experience of nirvana or the experience of becoming Buddha, which the word Buddha itself means to be the awakened one, through the mindfulness of breathing. And this word mindfulness of breathing for Buddha, the word is anapanasati. And actually, normally this word anapanasati, the Pali word anapanasati, is translated into English as mindfulness of breathing. But it can also be translated as in and out, the remembrance of the in and out breath. So actually, what's taking place in the practice of mindfulness of breathing when you are just following the breath, as we did in the beginning of this presentation.
We just had a hand up from Claire. I wonder, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, she's okay, I think. She's no longer got her question. Sorry, we couldn't get in there quickly enough.
Okay.
Is that okay, Claire, if you've got a question? Okay.
I will go on few minutes more, and then we have time for questions and
Right.
discussion.
No, there
Okay.
was no question. It was by accident. Thank you,
Okay,
Petri.
Oh, okay,
no
no
problem.
problem.
Okay, so in the practice of what is called mindfulness of breathing, anapanasati, which can also be understood as the remembrance of the in and out breath. So in that practice, we are each and every moment, as we are aware of breathing, also the breathing itself reminds us of its importance. And when we go deeper and deeper into that experience of breathing, and Buddha himself calls the practice of anapanasati, which also gave him the experience of enlightenment or the experience of nirvana, a noble dwelling, a divine dwelling, the Tathagata's dwelling. The Tathagata is very difficult word in Buddhism, but it means, for example, this kind of experience of vastness and deepness. So we go deeper and deeper, when we cultivate for years and years the practice of anapanasati, we get more and more connected, that we dwell or live in a noble way, in a divine way, in a tathagata way, which means like we experience this kind of vastness of the universe, and that vastness of the universe comes to us and opens us in a totally different way, which then also is connected to that which the Buddhist teaching of no self, because the whole world kind of becomes yourself, and your small self doesn't anymore be that primary self or the primary subjectivity of a human being. Okay, so from this experience, if the Buddhas, if Sue Hamilton said, and also Suzuki said, that that only after this experience of nirvana or enlightenment, which according to the Pali Canon, Buddha attained through many years of cultivation of anapanasati, of mindfulness of breathing, and only after that he started to teach this same experience and wanted to have that his students would gain this same experience. This means that Buddha's most important teachings and the fundamental ground of his teaching is intertwined, connected in a deep way with the experience of breathing, with that experience of anapanasati. And what Buddha started to teach, and what is the foundation of his teaching, is called the Four Noble Truths. And of the Four Noble Truths, Buddha said, you should know that there are these four truths, what I read now here. What are the four? They are the truth of dukkha, the truth of the arising or the cause of dukkha, the truth of the cessation of dukkha, and the truth of the way out of dukkha. Okay, here now, when we read these famous words of Buddha about the Four Noble Truths, I have not translated the word dukkha at all. I have left it in Pali language. Because normally dukkha is translated as suffering, sorrow, unhappiness, or unsatisfactoriness. But actually, this is only a translation. And if we would go deeper, and this is a translation, an understanding that is as deeply kind of, in quote marks, brainwashed into us as the Bible translations of translating pneuma as spirit and not as breath. The dukkha is translated almost as like generally and worldwide as suffering. But if we listen to that word in Pali and Sanskrit, because it's pretty much the same word in Pali, the language that Buddha spoke, and the Sanskrit, which belongs to the same language group, and they are deeply connected, Sanskrit and Pali. And we go to the etymology of the word dukkha. It doesn't mean etymologically suffering in the first place. It means that word first, the beginning or the second part of the word, that ka, K-H-A, means etymologically in the first place, it means opening or openness or gap or open space or empty space or air or ether. And it can be meant as a word, for example, of human bodies openings. For example, the opening of the mouth, opening of the ears, opening of the eyes into the world, the opening of the nostrils, and so on. And that duk in the beginning means bad, evil, difficult, hard, slight, or away from something, or opposite. So, if we go to the etymology of the word and not go immediately to the normal way of translating it as suffering, so again we do the phenomenological move of we put our prejudgments or the most common ways to understand something aside, then it would mean actually as bad opening or difficult opening or slight opening or opposite of opening or away from opening. So then you would read that there are the truth of bad opening or slight opening or an opposite of opening, and the truth of the arising or the cause of bad opening or slight opening, and so on. And then the truth of how the cessation, how to put that aside or how to get rid of that. And then there's the truth, the way out of it, some kind of a path to get out of bad opening. And then the next quote from Buddha is, Nirvana is the greatest sukha, from the text Dhammapada. And sukha is the total opposite of dukkha. Sukha is very often this sukha is translated as joy, bliss, or happiness. So total opposite of dukkha, the suffering, and so on. But again, there is this root of the word K-H-A, ka, and then su. And ka again is this opening, the open space, air, ether, the gap, and so on. And su means good, excellent, beautiful, excessive, worthy of respect, and so on. So then we could translate, which normally this passage from Buddha, from Dhammapada, is translated as something like nirvana is the greatest joy, or the nirvana is the highest happiness, or so on. Now here it means then that nirvana is the greatest or most primordial, because also that word which is translated as greatest is parama, which can also mean the best or chief or the worst, the first or primary or superior. So then nirvana is actually the greatest good opening or an excessive opening, or beautiful opening, or excellent opening, or opening that is worthy of respect. Okay, now if all of this is connected to breath, if that grows from the Buddha's experience, deep experience of mindfulness, of breathing, anapanasati, and he perhaps learned all of this from the breathing. What could be a bad or slight opening? And if that opening was connected to, for example, body's openings of mouth, ears, and eyes and nostrils and so on. So our perceptual opening, actually our perceptual opening to the world is what Buddha calls dukkha. And why is that? Because, for example, when we see something, it is never an excessive opening. Because, for example, when I see this book, there is this opening between me and the book, but it stops into this book. It blocks my sight. I don't see through it. So it is not excessive opening. Or when I see a building, I see the walls, but I don't see through it. So it blocks the opening. So it is slight opening. But breath is not connected with other people. If I see another person, I can't see through that other person, or I can't walk through another person, or I can't walk through or see through material things around us. So they are blocked, so they are dukkha. They are slight openings only. They are not excessive openings. But when I'm breathing and the breath comes, and I'm connected to that whole atmosphere, which is excessive, vast opening of the atmosphere of air, that is then the greatest sukha. That is the most excessive opening there is, because the atmosphere of air is vast and we are connected with our breath with it. And this is a totally different kind of understanding and interpretation of Buddha's message, like also I proposed how to interpret Jesus's message. And what would that mean? It would mean if there is any merit in what I have said here now about Jesus and the Buddha as phenomenologists of breathing, as teachers whose teaching started not from reading books, but from the experience of breath, the deep experience of breath. And it was the experience of breath that taught to them their teaching. And then they started to teach that what they have learned from the breath. That would change everything deeply, how we read Buddhist texts and how we read and interpret the teachings of Jesus. Thank you. Now we can have discussion. And now I stop sharing. Okay, I have gone way over time, but as I said,